Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week's discussion is on Werewolf the Apocalypse. Released in the early and mid-90s initially, Werewolf was one of White Wolf's big three for the World of Darkness. You had Vampire, Werewolf, and Mage. Last month I had already given a brief overview of Mage. And Vampire, there's a lot of discussion on that already, thanks to the release of 5th edition. So I'm going to leave that alone for now, and focus this month on Werewolf. So sit back, relax, enjoy, as we talk about Werewolf the Apocalypse. White Wolf loved having core conflicts for its games. You know, with Vampire, you had the Camarilla versus the Sabbat. With Mage, you had the traditions versus the technocracy. With Werewolf, you had the Wyrm. You had the Wyrm as the main antagonistic entity. And unlike the other groups, this was not an antagonist that was an organization. This was an antagonist that was a cosmic force. And to understand this conflict, we have to go back to the stories of it. Back to the stories of the origin. And they go very much like this. In the beginning, there were three cosmic entities. The Weaver, the Wild, and the Wyrm. The Wild was a force of unmitigated, unrestrained creation. It created purely to create. The Weaver gave shape and form and permanence to the things that the Wild created. The Wyrm, back then, was a force of balance. It would end things so that the world would not be overrun by the Wild's creations. And the Weaver got frustrated. And the Weaver bound the Wyrm. Wove a crystalline cage around the Wyrm. And the Wyrm went mad. The Wyrm thrashed and shook and struggled against its cage, and was only able to get a crack. And from this crack, it was able to reach out and start. It couldn't destroy things wholesale anymore, but it could weaken them, undermine them, make them self-destructive, corrupt them. And that's what the Wyrm had to start doing. Because the Wyrm went mad. The Wyrm went insane in its prison. And thus, the Corruptor Wyrm came from the Balance Wyrm. And that really gets to the heart of the philosophies in Werewolf. Werewolf is very much a game about, you're not fighting against single strong entities. I mean, yes, technically you are at times. You're fighting against the cosmic force behind them. The clawing, gripping corruption of the world. The poisoning of pristine lands. That's said to be from the Wyrm. Toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, those things. That's from the Wyrm. Everything that we see that's wrong with the world is a corruption of what it should be. And that is very much the core of what Werewolf is about. It gets deeper than that. When you look at each of the various tribes of werewolves, they each have their own weakness to the Wyrm's machinations. Their flaw that they overlook. But when you really get down to it, Werewolf is about fighting this corruption. Because the end is coming. Because the apocalypse is on the horizon. This is the last generation of werewolves before the apocalypse. And the final battle will be lost. Because Werewolf the Apocalypse is a story of heroes. But a story of doomed heroes. And that was different back in the 90s. That's what made Werewolf appealing. Because it was a game where you were not assured of victory. In fact, you were assured of defeat. But the story was, how would you deal with that? Would you just meekly accept it? No, that's not what the story is about. It's about trying to avert that destined defeat. Trying to defy your own fate. Defy the fate the Weaver set. Because it was very much you were, while a being of this world, you were fighting a cosmic force. And that was, at the time, novel. And so next week I will be talking a little bit about the tribes. So if you enjoyed this video, please click like and subscribe down below. I will see you next week. Until then, remember, have fun and keep gaming.